Yo, what is good everybody? It's your boy Tej, and in this video I'm gonna be showing y'all how Section 8 and Chichi get their signature drum bounce. There's three major types. I'm only gonna be breaking down two in this video because I did a video on one of those recently. I feel like it would have been kind of redundant if I did the same exact topic again, but in this video I'm gonna be breaking down a couple of their signature drum styles and the type of drum sounds they might use with that. And all the drum sounds that I'm using in this video come from my free introspective drum kit. I'll leave a link to that in the description. Be sure to go check it out. If you're new to the channel and you like these types of videos, be sure to hit subscribe. And with all that out of the way, let's just hop right into the first beat. So here's the first beat. The tempo that we have is 121 beats per minute, and I'll show you a quick preview of it and then I'll start breaking down all the drums. For this beat, you might have already been able to tell, but I was rolling mainly with the triplet hi-hat bounce. And typically the tempos that work for this hi-hat pattern are anywhere from like 120 to 140s range. And a few songs that feature this specific hi-hat bounce are The Bigger Picture, Get Money, and Wild Child. There's probably a handful more, but those are the three that come to mind immediately for me. So again, like I said earlier, all the drum sounds that I used in both of these beats are from my introspection drum kit. Again, it's free. I'll leave a link to it in the description. And so for this beat, I decided to go kind of basic in terms of the drum sound. I didn't want to add anything too much because I had a whole bunch going on with the hi-hats and they're already really fast. So I didn't want to take up too much room and make the beat a little too overcrowded. So jumping into the claps for this beat, I didn't really experiment too much with them, but you can definitely kind of adjust them and change them around as needed. Typically, if there's any major changes to these, it'll just be like the standard, put your clap like on an off beat here or here. Or what you can do is you can go to the 1/3 beat setting, basically just the same note chopping here, and then you can just paint in some claps and then play around with the velocities and pitch a little bit. Again, for this beat, I just kept it real simple, kept the clap on the 3rd beat of every measure. And for this, I kind of chose a sound that was fairly similar to like a Southside or a Luger slap clap. Typically this producer duo, they'll probably use something of this sort as their primary clap, or they'll use like a combo clap where they'll layer a clap with a snare. So moving on to the open hat for this track, I just have this one. I just have it hitting on the 2nd beat of my 4th and 8th measures. You can kind of play around with the placement of these a little bit. For the most part, I've seen these open hats hit either like on the 4th beat right here, on the 2nd beat, also sometimes on the off beat right here or right here. Typically they just kind of sit in those few spots. And now let's move on to one of the main features of this type of drum bounce. Like I mentioned earlier, the triplet hi-hats. So I'm actually going to start with a new pattern here. And so to start this pattern, you want to go up to your green magnet tool right here, or your user snap setting. You're just going to go down and select the 1/3 beat snap setting. And then from here, you can just go use this paintbrush tool and you can just click and drag and paint in these notes. And I personally like to hit Control L and just make these notes longer, so it's just easier for me to see and to work with. This is just how you get that basic triplet hi-hat. And from here, you can just duplicate it out for your full 4 measures, 4 or 8, whatever you're working with. And similar to a 2-step, this starts to get kind of repetitive. So we want to add a couple rolls. So the first one I might want to start with is I'll go to the end right here, and then I might just select these 3 and then hold shift and click on these notes and then drag them around to duplicate them. So I'll probably take these to like a lower part here or like a lower octave. It might sound something like this. And I might just reduce these velocities so these kind of shine through a little bit, and then I might roll these velocities up. Something basic like that. I can duplicate that over and maybe adjust the pitches a little bit, play around with these velocities at the end here a little bit. Now we have something that kind of leads into each section of the pattern a little better. For the rolls, we're going to go back to our snapping right here and then hit 1/3 step this time instead of 1/3 beat. What we want to do is we can just start selecting notes here. Typically, I'll only select like 1 or 2 of these triplets to duplicate. For this example, I'll probably use like one of these middle notes right here, select it, and then hit Control U on the keyboard. And that command slices your note according to the grid lines here. And then from here, we can just lower the velocity by hitting Alt Scroll. And so that's starting to sound a little better. I still feel like it's a little bit stale, so I'm gonna change up the velocities a little bit just to add a little more bounce to it, and then possibly delete some notes so that it's a little less repetitive. I'm just holding the Alt key on my keyboard and I'm just kind of hovering over the different notes and then just scrolling down so I can adjust these velocities. And then just with some more touch-ups and adding some more rolls, we can get a pattern that looks more something like this. And also another way you can add some more bounce to your hi-hats is you can go to this wrench tool right here, and then under the time section, there's the shift knob and you can adjust it, I'd say anywhere within about a quarter distance of the full length of the knob probably works for something like this. So our hi-hat pattern with all the other drum elements so far sounds like this. So moving on to the snare, we have this snare sound. And the primary idea kind of follows similar to most beats that I have. I'll have the snare hitting on this off beat right here. So typically it'll hit on the and of the first beat on even measures or the and of the fourth beat on odd measures. If we go in here, the ones at the end typically sync up with the 808 and the hi-hat. If we go to the 1/3 beat snap setting, you can see that it follows those grid lines. So similar to the rolls in the hi-hat, I went to the 1/3 step snapping. As you can see, these two rolls right here are following that snap setting. And as for these, I'd say for the rolls, try to pitch them around a little bit, adjust the velocities just to make it sound like it's kind of rising in. So piecing this snare pattern with what we have so far, it sounds like this. So lastly, going into the 808 here, you'll have your typical bounce where you're just using the 808 hit on the first beat and of the second beat and the fourth beat. Again, just kind of playing around with that 1/3 beat setting and just adding in rolls. Typically how I'd make one of these is I'll copy a note over, I'll highlight it, and then I'll use that same Control U command that I showed y'all in the hi-hat, and I'll just adjust these notes so that they're in different parts of the scales. So I know I'm in D minor, so all of the white notes except for B and A sharp are in my scale. And there's some combinations of notes that work out better than others, but you can kind of just play around with these and adjust the velocities as needed just to make it sound a little more interesting. And obviously these aren't going to sound great at every single pitch, so do try to play around with some of those. And I use that same strategy here at the end, but instead of shifting the notes down, I started with all of those same notes again, and then just every other note I pitched up from the original D note that I had here, and that creates this type of roll. And typically you'll see the rolls kind of formulated like this, where they just kind of roll down back into your root note. But altogether, my 808 pattern with everything sounds like this. So moving on to the second beat, again, I'm going to show you a preview of the finished beat. For this beat, I have a tempo of 153 beats per minute, and the tempo that this type of style is typically used in, I'd say is probably within 140 to about 160. So for the clap sound of this beat, like I mentioned previously, you could use either a normal slap clap or a combo clap, and in this one, I used a combination clap. It just sounds like a normal clap layered with a snare. Next, we have our hi-hat pattern, and similar to the last beat, we're using this same sort of tighter sounding hi-hat. In this beat, we're using the typical two-step. I kind of went a little crazy on the rolls here. I might have used somebody else's MIDI and modified it, or this is just a MIDI from like a previous beat that I used, or it might just be a mixture of both. I honestly don't really know. Since our main notes, the two-step, are in the 1/2 beat snapping, most of the rolls are going to be in the 1/2 step snapping. As you can see here, if I zoom in, a lot of these rolls here are using the 1/2 step snapping. But again, it's not limited to just that. So if I go to the 1/3 step here, you can see that there's a good number number of rolls that also have that in it too. And if you want to make these types of rolls right here, what you want to do is go to whichever choice of snapping that you'd like. Go to the paintbrush tool again. You want to go where you're going to paint out your notes, and then you're going to hold shift and then click. And then as you do that, you can drag down and it'll paint in new notes as you drag them, and then it'll just create that note slide down. So the final hi-hat pattern sounds like this. And with the end notes here, you can select these and go to the 1/6 beat snapping and then hit Control U to chop it. And then you can just kind of adjust the velocities as needed, and it'll create this more unique sounding roll to the end of your hi-hat patterns. Once again, going to the open hat, like I mentioned previously, your open hats will be in one of a few spots. So being on the 4th beat, the end of the 4th beat, end of the 1st beat, or the 2nd beat. And so in this case, I have one open hat sitting on the end of the 4th beat on the 1st and 5th measures. And then I have another open hat hitting on the end of the 4th beat on the 3rd and the 7th measures. And then it also hits at a lower pitch on the 2nd beat on this 4th measure here. And so now going into the snare pattern, I use this snare sound. It's a super typical Luger snare, I believe. Again, looking at the rolls here, if I go to the 1/3 step snapping, you can see that the notes here are quantized to that snapping. The same goes for these end rolls here, this one being the 1/3 beat, and then this one being quantized to the 1/3 step. You can also quantize your snare rolls to 1/2 step instead of 1/3 step. They'll just sound a little different, but honestly, it just comes down to personal preference. The difference between those two sounds something like this. But overall, the finished snare pattern sounds like this. And so moving into the last component of this beat, the 808, I kept a pretty simple 808 bounce because we were already doing quite a bit with some of the other percussion sounds, specifically the hi-hats and the snares. And similar to the previous beat, I used the 1/3 beat snapping on the ends here and kind of in the middle. I used that same strategy of leaving them all at the root note and then just adjusting the pitch to different notes within the key until I thought it sounded good. And also, in place of using a muted 808 note, you can just drop it an octave. And typically you don't really hear this, but I feel like it kind of gives a different or more unique bounce to it, rather than not having a note there altogether. So my first of two 808 patterns sounds like this. I mentioned this earlier, but typically the 808 samples that Section 8 and Chichi would use are kind of spin sounding 808s. And so moving on to the last 808 pattern, it's pretty much just the same exact thing, except at the end, I just had the notes changed up a little bit. So that's going to do it for me. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. Hope you're able to find it pretty helpful and take something away from it. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like. And again, if you want to see more videos like this, be sure to hit subscribe. Let me know what you'd like to see me do next in the comments below. And be sure to leave any feedback while you're there. And that's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Peace.